By the time modern humans reached Central Europe around 45,000 years ago, the balance of power between the two human species was already changing. In Germany, Neanderthal groups still occupied the limestone ridges and caves that had protected their ancestors for hundreds of millennia. Those heights gave them a clear tactical advantage. From a ledge or a cave mouth, they could throw heavy hunting spears with tremendous force, the slope itself multiplying the impact. For generations, that advantage had kept predators and rivals at bay. When modern humans entered the same valleys, they brought with them new technology. The use of projectile technology, the bow and atlatl, is now firmly documented at this time. These devices allowed a spear or arrow to be released with far greater range and velocity than a hand-thrown spear. They changed the geometry of survival. A hillside that had once been safe for a Neanderthal band became exposed to attack from any direction. Arrows and darts could climb the air as easily as fall through it. Distance no longer meant safety, and elevation no longer guaranteed dominance. The effect was that modern humans could surround a defended cave and keep its occupants trapped inside. A few well-placed archers or spear throwers could control the open ground, striking uphill with accuracy while remaining beyond the reach of Neanderthal spears. The Neanderthals, unable to hunt or gather without leaving the shelter of their cliffs, would have been slowly starved into submission. Each foray down the slope risked instant death from projectiles they could neither see nor dodge. Such encounters were not grand battles, but long campaigns fought through control of territory, and most importantly, hilltop caves. Modern humans could maintain the pressure indefinitely, rotating hunters between camps and keeping the caves under watch. The Neanderthals, isolated in small groups, had no means to break out once their supplies dwindled. The tactical superiority of ranged technology thus nullified the very adaptation that had served them so well: strength at close quarters and mastery of rough terrain. By 42,000 years ago, this slow warfare of distance had reached the Neander Valley itself. The modern humans of Goyet Cave, equipped with the bow and the atlatl, advanced westward across the German plains, following herds and occupying the river corridors. The Neanderthals withdrew into the limestone gorge near Düsseldorf into Feldhofer Cave, their final refuge. There the climate turned suddenly colder, cutting off migration routes and freezing the valleys below. Surrounded by ice and enemies, unable to hunt and hemmed in by superior technology, they endured their last winter. When the temperature fell further, the siege ended not with conquest, but with silence. When quarrymen discovered the Feldhofer remains in 1856, they uncovered a skull cap and limb bones belonging to a robust individual whose features clearly differed from modern humans. Subsequent excavation recovered additional fragments and artifacts consistent with late Mousterian technology. Radiometric dating places the occupation at approximately 42,000 years ago, coinciding with the final known phase of Neanderthal habitation in Europe. The genetic material extracted from these bones demonstrates that the Feldhofer Neanderthal belonged to a lineage distinct from that of modern humans. There is no trace of interbreeding at this site, indicating that the population remained isolated until extinction. The lithic assemblage lacks any evidence of blade or projectile technology. In contrast, contemporary sites to the east and south contain points and blades associated with the bow and atlatl. The geographic pattern mirrors the spread of modern humans across Central Europe and the contraction of Neanderthal territory. In 2024, genomic analysis of minute bone fragments from Goyet confirmed that the makers of these artifacts were early modern humans. Radiocarbon dating places their occupation between 47 and 45,000 years ago. The Goyet people were therefore present in Germany several thousand years before the last Neanderthals of Feldhofer. Their technology included the bow and the atlatl, both of which allowed the use of lighter projectiles capable of being launched far beyond the range of hand-thrown spears. The adoption of projectile technology had profound implications. It allowed smaller groups to hunt large herds efficiently without engaging at close range. It also changed patterns of mobility. Hunters could move rapidly across open terrain, striking from a distance and avoiding injury. The archaeological record at Ranis, with its emphasis on long blades and retouched points, reflects the adaptation of technology to this new mode of hunting and defense. By the middle of the 40,000-year period, Neanderthal and modern human populations occupied adjacent regions of Central Europe. Neanderthals remained concentrated in the west, along the Rhine Valley and the uplands of western Germany. Modern humans occupied the central and eastern territories. The contrast in their toolkits was distinct and functional. Neanderthals used close-quarter spears that required physical proximity to large animals such as horse, bison, or reindeer. Modern humans used technology that could strike from dozens of meters away. The difference in range removed the advantage of strength and terrain that Neanderthals had relied upon. Hilltop caves and narrow gorges had once provided natural defensive positions. A spear thrown downhill gained force from gravity, making any approach dangerous. Once the bow and atlatl appeared, those same slopes became exposed. Arrows and darts could travel uphill with equal effectiveness, reaching defenders before they could counterattack. Evidence from the overlap of these two populations indicates that competition for hunting territories intensified. The distribution of sites shows a gradual contraction of Neanderthal presence toward the northwest, culminating in the concentration of late sites such as Feldhofer and Balver Hole. Meanwhile, modern human sites multiplied in the Central Plains. The archaeological sequence corresponds to the demographic pattern of a rapid peak in Neanderthal occupation, followed by abrupt disappearance. The limestone gorge of the Neander Valley offered one of the few stable microclimates in northwestern Germany. Feldhofer Cave opened onto the side of a narrow ravine, protected from wind and with a steady water source nearby. The archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals occupied it during the final phase of the Middle Paleolithic, around 43 to 42,000 years ago. At that time, modern human groups from the east were already established in Germany. The combination of territorial competition and worsening climate made the Neander Valley a natural refuge. The location provided shelter and access to animals along the river, but it also restricted mobility. Once herds moved south and east with the onset of colder conditions, the occupants of Feldhofer would have been cut off from reliable food sources. Projectile technology played a decisive role in this confinement. Modern humans controlling the surrounding plains could monitor movements and prevent Neanderthals from reaching the open steppe. Arrows and darts could strike from beyond the range of a hand-thrown spear. The advantage of elevation was no longer meaningful. For Neanderthal groups dependent on short-range hunting, every attempt to leave their shelter carried a high risk of fatal attack. Over time, the lack of access to large game would have caused starvation, malnutrition, and eventual abandonment or death. The events in Germany formed part of a continent-wide pattern. Neanderthal groups survived slightly longer in the Iberian Peninsula and parts of the Caucasus, where ecological barriers delayed contact with expanding modern human populations, yet everywhere the outcome was the same. Once projectile technology spread, the older ways of hunting and defending became obsolete. Ironically, the Neander Valley specimen was found to have around 4.7% modern human DNA, the highest among a dozen Neanderthals tests, hinting that was not all interactions involved conflict. Sites such as Goyet and Spy in Belgium provide comparative evidence of the same sequence. Late Neanderthal occupations, ending around 42,000 years ago, followed almost immediately by Aurignacian layers made by modern humans. The timing aligns closely with the extinction horizon at Feldhofer, confirming that the process was synchronous across Western and Central Europe. Goyet Caves lie only 100 miles to the southwest of Neander Valley. Interestingly, the Neander Valley specimen, sometimes labelled as Feldhofer, falls closest in his maternal genetic lineage to a Neanderthal who lived at Goyet Caves around 44,000 years ago, known as Goyet Q3054. Goyet Caves are famous for their evidence of cannibalism, though Goyet Q3054 was not one of the cannibalized individuals as far as we can tell. Goyet Caves were some of the last living Neanderthals who may have been forced to eat each other as a result of being surrounded by modern humans armed with projectile technology. Around 42,000 years ago, Europe experienced one of the most abrupt cooling events of the late Pleistocene, known as Heinrich Event 4. Temperatures dropped dramatically, and permafrost extended across much of northern Europe. Rivers froze, vegetation disappeared, and the herds of grazing animals migrated to southern refugia. The pattern in Germany follows the same pattern found in France. Neanderthals were forced out of more favourable valleys in France into colder, less resource-rich regions in Belgium. In this setting, even well-equipped modern humans struggled, but their adaptive capacity, use of tailored clothing, storage of food, and social networks linking distant groups, enabled them to survive. Neanderthals, by contrast, were already under demographic stress. Genetic studies show that their effective population size was extremely small, with little variation among individuals. A few successive winters of failed hunts and disease would have been enough to collapse such fragile communities. The Neanderthals at Feldhofer were therefore trapped in a perfect convergence of pressures: climate deterioration, ecological isolation, and the presence of competitors who could strike from a distance. The cave that had once protected them from the cold became an enclosure with no exit. As the ice thickened over the valley floor and the herds vanished, the last band of Neanderthals in Germany ceased to exist. The story of Ranis and Feldhofer is therefore not just one of climate or biological replacement. It is a record of how technology reshaped the landscape of power. The invention of true projectile technology removed the last advantage the Neanderthals held and turned their defensive strongholds into traps. What followed was the first instance in Europe's history of one human population defeating another through control of distance, a strategy that would define warfare for the next 40,000 years. This is the setting for the final chapter of the Neanderthals in Germany, the story that unfolds from Ranis to Feldhofer and from dominance to extinction. During the period between about 60 and 42,000 years ago, the climate of Central Europe oscillated sharply between milder interstadials and cold, dry stadials. Forests advanced and retreated over open grasslands, and rivers carved corridors through the lowest plains of what is now Germany. Neanderthals had adapted to this environment over hundreds of thousands of years. Their bodies were compact and powerful, well suited to cold weather and close-range hunting. They relied on thrusting spears, stone points hafted on heavy wooden shafts, and cooperative ambushes at short distances. Their sites across western and central Germany, Kartstein, Sesselfelsgrotte, Bockstein and Feldhofer among them, show a continuity of behaviour typical of the late Mousterian. Fireplaces, butchered bones and hide-working tools demonstrate efficiency and skill, yet their technological base remained consistent. When the climate deteriorated and prey became more mobile, this strategy became less flexible. The Ranis Cave in Thuringia provides the earliest clear evidence of modern humans in northern Europe. Excavations have revealed a sequence of cultural layers belonging to what archaeologists call the Linkombian-Ranesian-Jersmanowisian industry. These layers contain long, thin blades and leaf-shaped points, manufactured with precision striking techniques that differ markedly from the flake tools of the Mousterian. At Ranis, the sequence continues into the early Upper Paleolithic. There, the toolkits evolved towards the Aurignation, the cultural complex that dominates Europe after 40,000 years ago. The transition from Ranis to Feldhofer thus represents not only a technological replacement, but also the replacement of one species by another. Technological superiority alone does not account for the complete disappearance of Neanderthals. Modern humans also demonstrated more complex social organization. Projectile technology required cooperation. The making of shafts, the maintenance of bowstrings, and the sharing of information about range and accuracy. These activities reinforced communication and teaching, which in turn sustained larger, more stable communities. Neanderthals, with smaller group sizes and limited long-distance contact, lacked this resilience. Archaeological evidence from Germany shows little exchange of materials over long distances in the final Mousterian, whereas modern human sites exhibit imported flint and ochre from far-off sources. Such networks allowed modern humans to redistribute resources during scarcity, while Neanderthals faced isolation. The capacity to wage sustained attacks, to deny others access to hunting grounds, and to maintain coordinated surveillance required precisely these networks. The success of the bow and atlatl cannot be separated from the social systems that supported their use. In this sense, the ludicrously rapid decline of the Neanderthals was both a technological and a social process. Ranis and Feldhofer together define the beginning and end of a crucial chapter in human evolution. Ranis represents the earliest secure presence of Homo sapiens north of the Alps, equipped with the bow and the atlatl. Feldhofer represents the last Neanderthal population in that same region. The distance between them, both in geography and in time, marks the brief interval during which the two species coexisted in Germany. Projectile technology also changed the social geography of the Ice Age landscape. Hunters could now control larger territories, intercept migratory herds at greater distances, and defend resource zones with fewer people. Groups at Ranis and elsewhere along the Elbe and Saale rivers could maintain watch over broad plains and watercourses. Neanderthal bands dependent on close pursuit found themselves excluded from these corridors. Archaeozoological studies show that reindeer and horse bones dominate faunal assemblages of this period. These animals migrated seasonally along open valleys, which became the main arteries of subsistence. Modern humans, capable of long-distance coordination and communication, followed and exploited these routes efficiently. The Neanderthals, isolated in smaller groups and lacking long-range technology, could not compete for the same herds. The strategic advantage of projectile technology thus operated as a kind of siege on a regional scale, confining Neanderthal populations to the margins of the accessible environment. Excavations at Ranis continue to refine our understanding of early modern human behavior. Microscopic use-wear analysis shows that many of the long blades were used as projectile points. Faunal remains indicate systematic butchery and transport of carcasses, suggesting a highly mobile hunting strategy. These findings correspond closely with ethnographic models of groups using the bow and spear thrower in open environments. At Feldhofer, the material record remains static. The absence of blades and bone tools confirms adherence to an older technological system. The contrast between the two sites is therefore one of adaptation versus persistence. Modern humans transformed the possibilities of their environment. Neanderthals continued to endure within the limits of their inherited methods until those methods no longer worked. The extinction of the Neanderthals in Germany can now be described as the outcome of converging factors rather than a single cause. Climate change reduced available habitat, projectile technology altered the dynamics of hunting and defense, and demographic imbalance magnified the effect of each shock. When these factors intersected around 42,000 years ago, survival for small, isolated Neanderthal bands became impossible. The process would not have appeared sudden to its participants. It unfolded over centuries, one winter worse than the last, one generation smaller than the previous. Yet in the archaeological record, it leaves an abrupt line. Mousterian artifacts disappear, replaced by blade industries and ornaments associated with Homo sapiens. The caves that once sheltered Neanderthals stand empty for millennia, then reoccupied by people who used the bow and atlatl, spoke complex languages, and decorated bone and ivory with deliberate design. Modern humans did not inherit Europe from the Neanderthals in a single conquest, but through the slow transfer of ecological space. The technology that ensured their victory also defined the future of human life. Projectile technology extended the reach of the human body. They created safety zones and allowed long-distance cooperation. From this foundation came the later developments of agriculture, defense, and organized conflict. The lessons of Ranis and Feldhofer show that the decisive step in human evolution was not the emergence of abstract thought alone, but the application of mechanical leverage to survival. The bow and the atlatl embodied that change. They were tools that turned intelligence into distance and distance into control. In the Neander Valley, That control determined who lived and who vanished. The confrontation between the Rani's modern humans and the Feldhofer Neanderthals marks the final transformation of Europe's Ice Age societies. The Neanderthals' skill, endurance, and intimate knowledge of their environment could not overcome the advantages of new technology and social organization. The confirmed use of the bow and atlatl allowed modern humans to dominate the open plains, to reach into the high caves that had once been impregnable, and to restrict the movements of their rivals. By the time the last glacial surge froze the rivers of northern Europe, the outcome was irreversible. The Neanderthals of Feldhofer had been isolated from their food sources and from each other. When the cold deepened and the herds departed, they had no means of recovery. Their disappearance around 42,000 years ago was not an accident of climate alone, but the culmination of a shift in power that began with the mastery of the projectile. In the archaeological strata of Germany, Rani stands as the first clear evidence of modern human presence, and Feldhofer as the last record of the Neanderthals. Between them lies the story of how one species replaced another, not through sudden catastrophe, but through the steady logic of technological progress. The invention of the bow and the atlatl defined that transition and ensured that, from that point forward, distance and coordination would be the foundation of human survival.